All right, so this time responding to Dan's video on types in general and just how the functions work within the different systems. In this case, it's kind of dealing with it from a socionics point of view. I'm taking that particular position on it. So let's just jump into this thing here.
Now, that's very hard to answer, right? If you're looking for a certain type or you're looking to be typed, you can make the argument that systems like socionics is the best to use in the moment because it's very consistent in the things that it says. The definitions is easy to read, easy to understand. It's simple. It's not hard. If you was to sit down and write it all down, it'd be easy for you to pin down what exactly does what and what to look for. And for that same reason, that's exactly why a lot of people use it. And because it's easy to use. You know what I mean? And easy to understand all at the same time. All of the hard work has been done already. The problem with making a system this rigid and this easy to use is that it doesn't necessarily focus on the development within the individual. And for that reason, you'll be looking at other systems that's the complete opposite, like Enneagram, that focuses on nothing but fluidity within the human being. Now, it's a loose system that has or barely has.
All right, let me stop there. So, first point, can socionics be rigid? Yeah, it can be because it's very TI heavy, as people would say, meaning it has categories, it has rigid rules that it either is or it isn't. Sit. Now, what makes socionics better than most of these systems? And I'm not saying socionics is perfect. I'm not saying socionics doesn't have a few areas that it can improve on or some areas that are just flat out bullshit, doesn't work. Okay. But what does make socionics better in a lot of cases is the fact that socionics is more rigid and has specific definitions for things. One of the reasons why many other systems suck is because their definitions suck. They're so loose and so flexible that it leads to uh, no consensus on what you're seeing or what is happening. Therefore, you can go online and you can see people arguing all day long about what is SE, what is TI, what is TE, what is this, what is that. And there's no consensus. 10 people in a room, 15 different opinions. Everybody wants to reinterpret what SE is or what TI is. Why? Because the definitions are weak, they suck. In order to be more scientifically accurate, we have to come up with some kind of a clear-cut definition that makes it obvious to everybody or to most people that this is what we're talking about. That's how we define it. It's either that or it's not. That's it. You have to eliminate the ambiguity of different systems. Now, second part, the development of the individual. Socionics does address the development of the individual. It will refer to you having strong functions that are always present, that you've had likely since you were young and has always been strong. And then as you get older, as you get better, you get more comfortable in certain areas, you experience things, you make mistakes and grow, these lower half functions start to get better. That's development. And who you were when you were younger is not who you are when you're 45. Why? Because you developed, those lower functions got better. They're still not as strong as your dominant functions, okay, as those top functions that you have, but they've gotten better over time through experience, through trial and error, through familiarity, and being more comfortable in certain environments. You've learned to use it a bit better, so it's not so glaringly obvious that you're bad at it, right? So there is development going on there. So it does have that. As far as Enneagram goes, Enneagram is just a different system, like altogether, totally. It's fundamentally different from pretty much everything else out there. It's not like the other Carl Jungian kind of based systems that are trying to do a more cognitive development. It's just not. Enneagram is dealing with things. First off, Enneagram is taking the assumption that it's not your nature, but your nurture. that it's the environment that you grew up in that taught you certain things, that made you feel a certain kind of way, and you spend the rest of your life trying to then deal with those feelings that you had when you were younger. Okay, it's dealing with it from a nurture point of view. All of the other cognitive function, like Carl Jungian styles of systems, all of them take the approach of nature. You were born this way. It's your genetics, it's your predisposition. You were born that way, regardless of your environment. Okay. So, right then and there, huge difference in how you're going to approach it. So, Enneagram really is this whole separate animal, which is kind of why Enneagram is used so easily to kind of be the supplementary thing. Like, so everybody likes to say, oh, they're an ESTP with an Enneagram 8, or they're an ESTP with Enneagram whatever. They're using it as a supplement to whatever their type is. Because Enneagram is so different, you can do that and try to use that system to fill in the little gaps about your personality or whatever. Okay. So let's keep moving.
Everything pinned down. And now you're going to be looking at those things in order to counterbalance other systems like socionics. That's the complete opposite. And with that being said, it's hard to actually look at one system since the human natural development will always be fluid. However, things are pinned down within human beings because that's a personality within itself. So, in order to find a personality within itself, you can see a person's processes and how they're being used, and you can see it consistently enough to be able to say, I think that this is an ESTP. However, you can't always say that I can use all of these definitions, all 8 of them, to find said ESTP, because not all ESTPs are alike. Yeah, you'd be able to see a lot of SE, and on occasions when they do use TE, the critical function, you'll be able to see it. And hey, it'll be easier to type them if you're following the systems and the definition to the T. But you're gonna run across an individual that's not showing as much TE. You know what I'm saying? Now, that doesn't mean that it's not being active, because they could still be thinking of the other side of the T.
All right. So, yes, all of these systems have to be somewhat rigid so that you can say, yes, you're an ESTP. Now, why? Because there are patterns. You are using certain elements very strongly and having these other elements weak. All ESTPs, therefore, will have very strong usage of certain elements and very weak usage of the other, but they're always the same. So the SE is always going to be strong in all ESTPs. That common. All of them will have strong usage of it. All of them will have strong usage of TI and TE. Okay, S team, all of that will be strong. Likewise, the vulnerable functions will always be the same. The role functions will always be the same. All ESTPs will be shit at FI. And it should be fairly pronounced that the FI is where they're weak and they struggle, and all the ESTPs will realize that. They'll know that. They'll say my FI sucks. Their NE also is usually pretty weak because that's their role function. They can kind of play with it, but it's just not very good, right? Their ability to be creative at understanding different points of view, how different lifestyles go about stuff, the potential for people to develop into other things, and be very good at understanding the possibilities and the potentials of a person's growth and development and who they are and their lifestyle. This is all stuff that ESTPs are usually shit at. They don't think about these things. They're horrible at it. All of them. Because all ESTPs have the same strengths and the same weaknesses within, that's why we call that person an ESTP. It's all the same. Okay. That is the consistent pattern. Now, when you find 10 ESTPs that have all met the criteria of being an ESTP and you put them together, do they all look exactly alike? No. Why might that be? Obvious reasons. For one, culture. What's their background like? What were they raised in? Was it a culture that is very expressive? Were they Americans? Are they Japanese? Are they Indian? Are they African? Where are they from? The culture matters on how they'll express and show themselves, how they're going to communicate, their body language, their desire to interrupt in conversation, initiate conversation, all that stuff. Culture. That's a variable that's not a type thing. You just have to be mindful of where they come from. Okay, what's their career like? What's their background in? What have they been spending most of their time and life doing? What's the culture of that career, background, and stuff? That's also going to change how they present. We can also get into subtype systems. Socionics has a few different subtype systems. Some people like it. Some people have different opinions on it. You know, teach their own on that part. But there is things within socionics to account for that too, where you don't really have to leave socionics in order to try to account for it. All right. I'm already bringing up World Socionic Society on because I like their particular model that they have here. It just kind of shows everything nice and neat here. The ego function, super ego, super id. I usually like to ignore these damn things because I feel people cannot help but go into Freud and start thinking of these Freud things, and they just shouldn't. It just doesn't help. I really wish socionics would have like eliminated this ego, super ego shit just to avoid people's confusion on that. To me, I have no problem, but I know a lot of people just can't help it. They just start trying to Freud it out. Whatever. So here we're looking at the particular model. It's an 8 model system. The premise being, whether it's socionics or John Beebe, who also uses an 8 model system, the premise is that in order to be a human, a fully operating human being, you have all of these elements within you. You would not be able to survive and get through the day if you didn't have them. We all have them. The difference is that some of us are just stronger in some elements than others. Some of us value certain elements more than others. And because of that strength and that valuing of a particular element and displaying boldness of it, how much it shows, that is what gives you a unique personality type that makes you different from everybody else. That makes you an ESTP instead of an INFP, right? That's it. But you have all of them. It's based on the assumption that you cannot survive if you suddenly don't have certain functions or you don't have certain elements. Like, how do you do anything? That's the premise. Some other schools of thought, MBTI, other things would say, no, it's just 4 functions. You only have these 4 functions and that's it. And then you just use them together to try to like pseudo make other things happen. At the end of the day, there comes a point where that either makes sense to you or it doesn't. There's just nothing more to say to that. And for some people, it just doesn't make sense. They genuinely feel like they don't use certain functions. I would personally argue that you're wrong. You wouldn't survive. It's like saying you don't have a full DNA code. You only have half the code. You wouldn't survive. You wouldn't exist as an organism. But that's it. We're gonna keep going on this, but let's continue on a little longer so I can dive
being high T users in general, but that doesn't mean that they're always going to say it. And now it's going to be harder to type these people if that's no longer a part of the typing strategy that you have written down on paper. See, it's not that easy. You know what I mean? Now you can look at other systems that kind of lies within the middle if socionics and enneagram were on a poles because they're kind of like the most extreme within the typology systems. However, the ones in the middle is kind of like everything else, MBTI and things of that nature. But um, with that being said, chasing the developments within personality type is a good thing because people are developed differently based on their situation. However, it's even hard to track that if the system itself isn't consistent in how it explains these things or even makes it easy enough for people to understand these things, and which is going to create some type of problem there. So as you can see, the development systems will have an easier time in mapping down a person's exact type but only from long periods of time. Now, see, time is now added to the occasion when you're talking about a system that's less rigid, you know? But if you're talking about an extreme system like Enneagram that's not rigid at all, then you're not actually pinning down anything or tracking anything of significance when it comes down to type. So one of the systems that focus on development is, let's say, Axis 12. There's a development portion there where they're focusing on the modes. So, for instance, the modes of revision would be your PE and your JI. For me, that's SENTI. Within this mode, you can see that I'm using it consistently. So you would then say that, okay, I'm using it very consistently. It is the most consistent process that I'm using. Within that mode will live my dominant function. Now you can make the argument that type doesn't exist. However, certain type does exist. There are personality types, but they're so different even within their type that at the same time it doesn't exist. Both of those things are true. You know what I mean? If I was to track myself down as an ESTP, that is true because you will see my processes play out most of the time.
All right. So some issues with this here. One of the problems with I guess you could say with the Axis 12 or cognitive personality theory, whatever, is that it is very much its own thing, that it's also probably less heard of and less understood than most other types, maybe because it's just newer, perhaps. So there's a lot of terminology that it's using that has to be explained carefully prior to just using it. So using mode, using terms like revision, using terms like alignment, to a lot of people, this doesn't mean anything. You're using terminology without defining what that means and showing what's happening when you say that. What are you talking about, right? Because a lot of other systems don't use those terminology. So it's being mindful that you're throwing terms around that nobody knows what the hell you're saying.
But there have been stretches in my life where I have flipped this bad boy in different ways.
Oh, and the different types, certain systems, whether they believe it or not, at the end of the day, everyone has to remember that all of these things are theories. All of them are just theories. They're a theoretical model to try to explain why people think the way they do and behave the way they do and process the way they do. But it's a theoretical model. It isn't real. None of it is real. MBTI, Axis, Enneagram, so none of them are real. They're just an abstract model that we can try to apply to human beings to try to explain why they do what they do. But it's not real. So in truth, are there ESTPs? Is that a thing? No. We just see a certain kind of person and we see many more people that seem to fit the same general pattern of thinking and behavior. And we have decided to assign that person a certain name. We call them an ESTP, or we call them the warrior, the conqueror, the fighter, the race car driver, the ass grabber, whatever the hell you want to call it. Okay, call it whatever you want, right? All we're saying, we're assigning a name to this generalized pattern of thought process and behavior, and we assign a name just for ease of communication. That's it. So we can all talk to each other and say, hey, I saw an ESTP today, and you know exactly what I meant by that. You can picture in your mind what that generally looks like. So it is meant to be a model assigned to how this general personality looks like. It doesn't have to be exact. That's something that people also have to get through their heads. No model will be perfect where it's going to explain exactly what that individual is going to do, think, when, where, how. No one's that perfect. They're all meant to be a little bit vague. Or I should not say, let me take that back. They're all meant to be a little bit abstract and to be taken fairly loosely. This is the general pattern, the general interest, the general values, and the general style that type of person operates and behaves like, right? We call that an ESTP. That's what all these models are doing.
also go type myself in those stretches, I will come out a different type if I'm relying on a system that is rigid to the type that is looking for. Interesting. So that's why I'm not a fan of typing videos of individuals, one or two. I can be consistent in following the system to be able to type them in the moment, like what I think Socionics is doing. But I can also be consistent in getting it wrong because I'm typing people within that moment. You know what I mean? And that is the benefit of knowing people. And
Which, of course, ideally, when you want to type somebody that you don't know personally, ideally, you would be better off spending a week, a month, whatever, hanging around them, seeing how they operate, seeing what they do every single day, all day long. Yeah, that'd be great. But in the actual practicality of it, that can't be done. You just don't have time to be following somebody around all day long for a week. Nobody does that. That's why everything in psychology, therapy sessions, whatever, you go in for an hour, you talk about stuff. You go in for 2 hours, maybe you talk about things, you explain yourself, whatever, right? It's these short periods of time that you're getting a snapshot of who this person is. Now, the better the system, the and the skill of the user, critically important. There are people that do typing that flat out just suck at typing. There's no other way to put it. They just suck. They might be good at understanding the system and understanding the model and explaining the model and understanding just the model, but they have a hard time applying that model to a living, breathing person standing in front of them. There are some people who just suck. Doesn't matter what system they're using, they just suck at using the damn thing. That's another component. So there's a skill aspect to it. And then there's just how good is the model itself? How good is that at being able to type people? You need more strict definitions of things in order to ensure that you are getting it right. Okay, if your definitions and things are too fluid, too loose, too ambiguous, there's too many things that can go wrong. Okay, it reminds me of talking about a weapon, a machine gun or something. The more moving parts, the more chances for something to go wrong, something to jam, something to slip up, something doesn't work. The less moving parts, the less likely for something to go wrong. It's just that simple. So there are some systems that kind of like out overthink it. They kind of outdo themselves because they're trying to be a little too fancy at capturing every fluid little thing that goes on inside someone's mind at any given moment. And they end up just typing everything wrong.
yeah. Can your family members type you? Not using the system, they can't since they don't know the system, but they can type you better than the system actually can because they know you. You get what I'm saying? They start to track the tendencies within the individual, and it's a very personalized approach to knowing an individual. And because of that, they can pin down a behavior or pin down an act or pin down a process, which are three different things, to you as a family member or a friend. So the systems you can use to help utilize certain processes and times of your life do exist. And you can find a system for all of these type of things. However, that doesn't mean that they're going to pin you down correctly all the time, which is obvious, right? Um, I do think that human beings, because we're so fluid, systems that focus on development is more important than systems that focus on type. The development is more important, in my opinion. There have been times where I present much more and easier to track ESTP, and there has been times where I haven't. But if I'm sticking to a system that is yes well defined but rigid to how they go about typing, I'm going to be consistent because it's well defined, but also consistent at also getting it wrong because I'm not fully acknowledging the development within a human being. Also, another thing to keep in mind is how do
Okay.
you
So I agree with the part that the development is important. Getting the type correct is only step one. Now you've typed a person ESTP. Okay, now what? What are you going to do with that information? That's where we now talk about the development. What does it mean to be an ESTP? What are the things you need to get better at? What are the areas you seek help from? What are areas that you could use knowing that you're an ESTP, and how that's going to affect your relationships, how it's going to affect your parenting style, how you're going to relate to your children, how you can best support children, what kind of mental issues might you have because you're an ESTP that you're more likely to do, what are the ways you can come across to people, what job and career interests what you want to have because you're an ESTP that ESTPs typically like and excel at. All of that is the real priority. Getting the type right is only step one. And yes, there are some systems out there that focus really on getting the type right, and then they don't really have much of anything else after that. There are systems like that. Socionics, I would say, is not one of them. In fact, Socionics is probably one of the superior systems because it has intertype relations. It has discussions of how you fit into society and what areas you're likely to succeed in and what are the values you're likely to have. Socionics already has all that flushed out and has had that for quite some time. That doesn't mean that everything they have in there is perfect. There are some little glitches in there. There are some little details that doesn't always work out quite right. There's sometimes little details in the system that it can be a little subjective. So it isn't perfect, but no system ever is. Okay. But Socionics does have all that. Unfortunately, a lot of that doesn't get discussed enough, probably because people are too busy arguing over what is SI and SE and TI and all this other crap, the basics. That's the kindergarten level stuff that they never get to the higher level education shit because they're still fucking around with basic kindergarten stuff. Right. Being able to be typed ESTP correctly, consistently, again, the skill of the type of the who's typing you. Now, if you are an ESTP, you should be typed ESTP every single time. Okay, if we can assume that the skill of every typist that comes around, okay, is the same, they're all equally skilled. They should all equally type you ESTP because an ESTP doesn't suddenly stop being an ESTP. You are always an ESTP. The strengths of the ESTP will always show, and the weaknesses of the ESTP will always show. That should happen each and every time. Okay. During a good interview, the questions themselves should be designed in such a way to flush that out. What are those strengths? What are those weaknesses? Which strengths are consistently showing up and which weaknesses are consistently showing up? Therefore, you're this type. Yes, in a moment, in a casual conversation, in a different location, whatever, yeah, you might look a little different. You might behave like a different type for the moment, okay, to a casual looker. But to a skilled typologist who's asking you good questions, looking for the consistency in the answers and so on, they should all come to the same conclusion that you're an ESTP. Whether you're in a good mood, bad mood, it doesn't matter.
So the person is actually typing themselves correctly. How do you know if the person is actually perceiving themselves correctly, is what I meant to say. Sometimes a person can't even see themselves and will tell
Very
you
true.
what they notice within themselves, but they themselves are wrong. That happens all the time.
Yep, that's true.
So, with that being said, I'm not trying to say use a certain system. What I'm trying to say is what to look for when you're using systems to type yourself. Typing yourself might not always be a good thing, depending on the individual. Sometimes it can make things a lot worse, especially if you're a person that needs more help than not.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. A lot of times we don't perceive ourselves correctly. We can make arguments and counter arguments in our mind as to why we're using this instead of that, and we can screw it up. And that's why you do need to get input from people around you, people who know you, people who don't know you, whatever. So sometimes that means just getting input from friends, family. Sometimes that means getting input from a skilled typist, whatever. But a lot of times, yes, we can get our types wrong. Um, there are certain types that are more prone to get their types wrong. And then there's certain types that are more prone to get their types right. Some types are they're well defined. It's pretty clear. It's just a lot easier to get yourself right. It's much more obvious. There are some types who know themselves very, very well, typically. I find EIIs, INFPs usually know themselves pretty darn well. So they usually don't miss. There are other types that are all over the place. Some types that are very TI polar. They don't like rules and they don't like clear definitions. They don't like that. They're constantly avoiding that. So it makes it hard to use a system that has clear-cut definitions. Usually like ESFPs, for example, are one of those notorious types like that. An ENFP could be a notorious type for that. They're TI polar. Okay. So it happens. So I agree with a lot of that typing yourself. Sometimes some people can do it. Many people can't do it right. And even if you can do it, you should still always seek outside opinion.
So if the actions aren't acknowledging the obvious, so to speak, then it's not as obvious, in my opinion. You know? Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think later.
Wow. Okay. So I guess that'll wrap up this particular video. More to come.